All right, we are live, folks. Recently, there's been a wave of stories coming out that paint a pretty bleak picture of our so-called green future. From high energy prices and energy shortages to dictates about how we should live our lives and whether or not you should even have kids. Climate alarmists seem to have no shortage of bad ideas. We're going to be talking about all this and more on episode 375 of the In the Tank podcast. All right, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, we've got what is going to be our normal crew, I think. We've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing really well. I have way behind on my Christmas shopping, but hey, it's only December 8th. I got plenty of time.
You got some time. Justin Haskins, fresh off his adventure cutting down his own Christmas tree.
Oh my God.
You are the
what are you
director
trying
of
to
the
do to me
Socialism Research Center. How are you doing, good sir?
You trying to make me go back into the therapy again? I just got out. I've been
That's
in
right.
therapy since I cut down that damn tree. It's been
That's right.
nothing but hell. Nothing
Yeah.
but hell. That was the worst experience of all time. We should do an episode just on that experience.
Well, that's what you get for growing your carbon footprint by cutting down a tree. So that's what you get. Also, we've got Chris Talgo, who is the editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
Doing good. Got my fake tree up like I always do.
That's
and,
right. For the environment.
For the environment, of course. I'm very, very concerned about that. And I just want to say that I like to do my Christmas shopping the day before because I do all gift cards.
That's a good
I have
point.
a question.
Solid
I have
strategy.
a question for Chris.
Sure.
Chris, how many young Chinese children were required to build that tree of yours? How many? Over under 5.
Well, so I've got a plastic tree.
I think it was made in America.
I got a plastic tree as well, but it dates back to like the 70s. So that's as green as it gets.
It takes tiny little hands to put all of those little needles on the tree. So
Good point. Yeah, that's why I had my 2-year-old repair the trees.
There you go.
Damage.
Well, soon it'll be AI. AI will be doing all the work for us. So
Audio only listeners, I always have to put this message out there. Those of you that are catching the audio only on a Friday or later, you can join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time. Join us live streaming on Rumble and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. You can join the conversations, throw your comments and questions in the stream. Perhaps we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll answer your questions on the fly. Also, I mentioned this for the first time last week that we were going to start shifting the In the Tank show, the In the Tank podcast show. For the audio only listeners, everything's going to be the same. But for the YouTube listeners, we're going to be shifting it off of the Heartland Institute main channel and onto Stopping Socialism TV. So for this week, I think we're streaming on both channels simultaneously. But you might want to get in the habit, if you're not already, in watching our show on Stopping Socialism TV at the beginning of the year. Next year, we're going to be solely on that channel. We're going to open up a whole bunch of different ways for fans to interact with us. We're going to try to grow the community over there. Also, one other thing to note is that we have our 15th International Conference
15th.
on Climate Change.
Yep.
Yeah, 15th, coming to Orlando, Florida on February 23rd through the 25th. We already have tickets for sale, so you can go to heartland.org, and at the top there'll be a thing you can click on to buy tickets or find more information, or you can go to climateconference.heartland.org and see this website that Andy's got shown on the screen right now. Find all types of different information. Jim, anything you want to say about any of those things I brought to the table already?
No, it's going to be a fantastic conference, as all of these have been. If you think you know what's really happening to the planet when it comes to climate change, you probably do know a lot more than most people in the media. But you could really get an expert. You can get all the best experts in the world to really tell you what's going on. So you'll learn a lot about what sea level rise is actually doing, what the drivers of climate change are, and it's all data based. And we're also going to have people. Somebody here in the chat. Here on YouTube asked if Alex Epstein is going to be speaking at our conference, because we're going to be dealing obviously with a lot of energy policy there as well. He has spoken at previous conferences. I have invited him to speak at this one, and we're working on maybe trying to figure out a way to work that out. But he's an example of these of people that are real experts on climate and energy policy and the climate science. And it's a lot of fun, and you meet a lot of people who are also very interested in learning what's going on in the planet. So I've gone to, I started at the Heartland Institute, I think, when we were on our second climate conference, and I've learned so much, and it's really something you shouldn't miss. If you're able to be down in Florida in February, who doesn't want to be in Florida in February? We'd love to see you there at the conference. It'll be great.
All right, fantastic. And yeah, this episode is going to be primarily climate policy focused, but there's a story I want to briefly talk about. And this is to do with Elon Musk releasing the so-called Twitter files. This is about the conservative censorship in general and the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop specifically. And of course, like a lot of stories do, this came out like the hours or maybe the day after we recorded our last episode last week. So currently the story is about a week old. So I don't want to dedicate a substantial amount of time to talking about this because, in the scheme of things, in the 24/7 whatever news cycle, like this is an old story, but it's a topic that we've covered pretty extensively on this podcast. So I feel like it would be pretty weird if we didn't have anything to say about it. So just very briefly, and I'll open up to you guys to comment on it, but it appears as though our suspicions were correct. Twitter took down the post about Hunter Biden's laptop story, censored it like it was the worst type of content imaginable. And then you can see in these emails that were released where the Twitter people are trying to justify the move to take this stuff down after the fact. So they acted first, and then they were like, all right, now we have to justify this. So you could see kind of where their bias was coming in with all of this. And the reporter that was releasing all this, what's his name? Matt Taibbi.
Yes.
Yep.
He makes a solid case that this move and many others were very partisan in nature. He showed a bunch of communications where the Biden campaign seemingly routinely reached out to Twitter with a list of tweets that they wanted taken down, and then the responses to some of these inquiries were just taken care of, like thanks, like it's just a routine thing. So Jim, I'm sure that you've been following this closer than I have. Do you have anything to add to the conversation that hasn't been said on a million podcasts over the last 7 days?
No, I'll just say, look, there's a wonderful book by Molly Hemingway of The Federalist called Rigged, and it is about the 2020 election. And, some people say the election was stolen. Here I go again, getting us banned, putting these words together. But this shows how the system was rigging elections to make sure, doing everything they could to make sure that Donald Trump was not reelected as president. And so I think one of there's going to be more of the Twitter file stuff coming out. I think one of the real interesting wrinkles is that the FBI knew about the Hunter Biden laptop since I think at least 2019. They knew that Rudy Giuliani had gotten possession of the information on the laptop from the store owner because they were monitoring Rudy Giuliani on a trumped up some sort of foreign espionage investigation. So the FBI knew all this stuff. And then right before the story is broken by the New York Post, which they knew was going to happen any day now, they went to Twitter and Facebook and said, hey, be on the lookout for Russian misinformation campaigns specifically dealing with Hunter Biden. Wow. And then when the story breaks, what does Facebook and Twitter immediately do? They take it all down. So the FBI knew this was happening and set it up so that it would be suppressed. That is, I think, the heart of the real scandal here. It's not just a media scandal. It's a government and intelligence scandal in the United States. It's a big mess. And what a surprise. our corrupt corporate media isn't really covering it at all.
Yeah, well, that was actually going to be my question to Chris, because Chris watches the CNNs and the MSNBCs so that we don't have to. Did this story register on those networks at all?
Nope, not one bit. Fox News actually did a analysis of the media coverage, and it was zeros across the board. Jim, hit the nail on the head here. But I would also say that the intelligence community in mass, was defending the move by Twitter and the move by Facebook. Remember, 51 intelligence officials, including James Clapper, Michael Hayden, and on, they come out and said this is classic Russian disinformation. They never looked at the laptop. They never interviewed the repair shop owner who had the laptop. They came out and just said this is Russian disinformation without any evidence, without looking at anything. And remember, Twitter actually said that the reason why they buried this story was because it was, quote, hacked material. That's just not true. It was never hacked material. Hunter Biden left his laptop at a Mac repair shop. After a couple months, the Mac repair shop man had ownership of the laptop according to the terms of the agreement. So it boggles my mind that the FBI has had this now since December of 2019, yet no charges have been filed against Hunter Biden or anyone involved in it. Yet the people who were trying to expose it, whether it's Rudy Giuliani or others, in the old Trump sphere, how come they've been arrested on trumped up charges? It is just, we live in a totalitarian state. You can call it a republic, but we do live in a totalitarian state because the government has the ability to come and crush anyone who, dares defy their narrative.
Yeah, Justin, like I said at the beginning of this, we have a lot of topics to get to, but I just felt weird not talking about this at least briefly. So do you have anything to add to this topic?
Yeah. So the only thing that I would add that hasn't been said, a million times before is that one of the most interesting, we don't know everything. We haven't come up with everything in the Twitter files. A lot of it has just been sort of selectively leaked. So there's a lot more information we're going to find out over time. There's basically been a very small group of people who have had the opportunity to review it. At some point, the public will probably get a chance to review some or all of it. And when that happens, I think you're going to get a flood of additional information. But of the things that have been revealed so far, one of the most interesting things is that there's a member of Congress named Ro Khanna, who is a representative from California, far left-wing representative from California, a Democrat. And interestingly, this representative reached out to Twitter in the midst of the ban on the Hunter Biden laptop story, and basically said to him, you're making a huge mistake. And suggested that they need to reverse course because, if the New York Times had done this on a war crime story or something like that, you wouldn't be doing that. And we don't want to set this precedence. And good for this person.
It's a guy, by the way, in case you were wondering.
I'm not going to say what
you never know nowadays.
But the bottom line is like in the world that we live in today, where it seems like so many people in the Democratic Party are eager to ban and censor people on the right, institutions on the right, media outlets on the right at every opportunity. Good for Ro Khanna for stepping up and saying, you know what, this is really bad. What you're doing is setting a very bad precedence.
Right.
I don't know what happened after the fact. I don't think they did anything as a result of that. But at least there was an attempt made to say this actually, if applied to the left, would hurt us too.
Sure.
And I think that that's actually something that really hasn't gotten any attention at all, but is pretty interesting. And so good for Ro Khanna.
Yeah, and I get the sense that this isn't the last batch of information that's going to be coming out. There seems to be drips and drabs of other stuff that's coming out that's categorized under this Twitter files thing. So, if there's more stuff that breaks, especially maybe right before an episode. I think that we'll have more to talk about in future weeks. But
Donnie, just one last point to
keep it
make here.
quick.
Jack Dorsey said that he had no clue that any of this was going on as the CEO of Twitter, which I think is an indictment of just how dysfunctional Twitter is.
Yeah, and I will say, just reading through like all of the first wave of threads, is that Jack Dorsey's name was like completely not a part of the equation. Like he was not
at all.
brought into the loop in any of this.
Yeah,
Right.
and let me just wrap it up by saying what's on the Hunter Biden's laptop should still be a national story, because it gave people insight into what is the Biden family business, which was his layabout, drug addicted son getting lots of money to funnel back into the family just because he was Joe Biden's son. That is an enormous scandal and still needs to be reported on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you telling me Joe Biden's the big guy?
I was gonna say there's still a question about that. I
We
think
don't
it's
know
Chris
that.
Christie, but that's
Could
just...
be anybody. Yeah, could be Chris Christie. Could be anyone.
Could be me.
Could be a homeless man on the street. Could be Jim. Could be anybody. Who knows?
Your
Who's
guess
the
is
big
as good as
guy?
mine.
Who is the big
Leave
guy?
in the comments who you think the big guy is. I'm curious about that. All right, well, let's get to our main topic of discussion, because there's several different facets of this thing that I want to look at here. Over the past couple of days, I've seen a number of we'll just call them troubling stories that revolve around climate change and the supposed solutions to climate change. So the first thing that I have in my show notes, I think, is like an item talking about high energy bills that Americans are going to be paying as we get into the winter months. And as you would expect, they're going to be high. But we've talked about this a million times. I don't think there's anything new that we can bring to the table when it comes to high energy prices, whether it's here or in Europe, and what's causing them, the terrible policies that are leading to all of these high energy prices. We've went over that ground numerous times. So I want to immediately just move to something a little bit more juicy. So any objections to that? Anyone want to say anything about high energy prices, or should we move to immediately to a little bit more of a juicy item?
I got my first energy bill for the cold winter months, and it was not pretty.
Yeah, ditto.
Not pretty.
Ditto.
And I'm leaving my thermostat a lot colder than I want it to be at.
Yeah, let's complain about that in February. Let's get on to the news.
All right. So, like I said, I want to move on to something a little bit more juicy here right off the bat. So, a new report was recently released by a couple of organizations, some that I've never heard of. One called C40, which is like a collection of 40 different cities that want to be super active on climate change action or something like that. One called Erupt, and the University of Leeds. So these are all very well-established, well-funded organizations. They're, as far as I can tell, well-respected in the realm of climate alarmism and all of that. So they released a report titled "The Future of Urban Consumption in a 1.5 degrees Celsius World." So the report's executive summary starts with this statement. This report by C40 Erupt and the University of Leeds assesses the impact of urban consumption on climate breakdown and explores the type and scale of changes needed to ensure that C40 cities reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in line with internationally agreed climate-safe limits. So the report explains a number of things that citizens residing in these large cities need to do to ensure that their cities reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So these include things like reducing the number of clothing items that you purchase, dietary changes, reducing numbers of flights, reducing car ownership, etc. Now, of course, these are all things that we've heard about before. Reduce your carbon footprint, right? Recycle more. What's new here? Well, the report goes a step further than just listing a bunch of generalities. They boil it down to numbers that every person needs to abide by to avert, a climate disaster. So the report categorizes the required individual actions down to progressive targets by 2030 and ambitious targets by 2030. But, the world is ending soon if we don't act. So let's be ambitious, shall we? So under the ambitious targets, and Andy, if you're scrolling through here, you need to go a little bit further into like section 6 where they get to the very specific things. But when it comes to clothing, you can only purchase 3 new clothing items per year per person. This is the ambitious targets to make sure that we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions down to internationally agreed upon limits, right? When it comes to your diet, you can only consume 16 kilograms of meat per person per year. Oh, wait, no, sorry. That's the progressive target. The ambitious target calls for, that's right, 0 kilograms of meat per person per year. The same thing goes for dairy consumption. So basically, you have to go vegan, according to this report. For vehicle ownership, the progressive target is 190 vehicles per 1,000 people, or fewer than 2 out of every 10 people get to own a car. And under the ambitious target, 0 private vehicle ownership. That's right, everybody. No more cars for you and me if we want to hit our greenhouse gas targets here. Also, the report outlines what the optimum lifespan of these cars in the ambitious target would be, and that is 50 years. So they want anyone that does own a car, this car has to last for 50 years. And I don't know about you, but I don't see many cars from 1972 driving around the streets anymore here in 2022. But again, this is what our global elites are kind of foisting upon us. That also talks about your air travel. The ambitious target would have people only taking one short flight, which is about 930 miles. So, Justin, unfortunately, I won't be able to come and visit you, every 3 years per person. So again, under this green future for society, you can only take one short plane trip every 3 years. So, I mean, there's a bunch more in this report, but I'm curious of just your initial reactions. Jim, you're the one that brought this report to my attention. So what do you think of when you hear some of these numbers?
Well, the first thing I thought of is like, if you're putting this report together, if you're a researcher at the University of Leeds and you're like, actually the purpose of this, as you said, the C40, I guess that's 40 of the biggest cities in the world. And this is kind of an outline of what mayors can do. Mayors like our Lori Lightfoot here in Chicago, what they can do to help fight climate change. And they can impose these kinds of restrictions on their own people, like some kind of dictator, I suppose. But the idea that by 2030, that's 7 years from now, in 2030, it should be, if they reach their ambitious goal, that everybody on Earth, everybody, that includes the Kardashians, are only allowed 3 new items of clothing every year. Now, when I heard that, I thought, well, I'm going to invest in underpants futures, because if I could only get 3 articles of clothing new every year, it's going to be underwear,
Good point.
And I'll deal with everything else, I suppose. But like, when you're putting this report together, and then flights, every 3 years, you're allowed to fly a total of 932 miles, total round trip everywhere. I mean, that. And of course, John Kerry's not going to adhere to that sort of thing. Lori Lightfoot's not going to adhere to that sort of thing. None of our global elites are ever going to adhere to any of these things. It's always, every single time, what you little person, what you plebes, what you useless, mouth breathers on Earth have to do in order to save the planet. Everybody else, the elites, will be able to do whatever they want. They will never have any reduction in their standard of living. But I thought, was there even among climate alarmists, was there nobody who looked at this report and said, hold on, you're serious? 3 articles of clothing a year? Really? That's what you say we need to do to save the planet? And then if we're only going to go to the progressive goal, it's 6 articles of clothing per year? Nobody who produced this report and publicized it and shared it around said, guys, nobody is going to do this, 1. And 2, if we publish this, people will never take us seriously again. This is absurd. This can't happen. And there wasn't a single person anywhere involved in the production of this report who had an inkling of saying anything reasonable like that. And so that is actually a real window into just how far gone these climate cultists are, that they can't even see how on its face that is so absurd. And again, we're allowed 16 kilograms of meat per year. That's not just beef. That's all meat, which includes fish, I suppose, but definitely chicken and beef. And then eventually, their ambitious goal, 0. No meat at all. So you think it's reasonable, guys, to tell the world we all must go vegan in 7 years. And nobody says, you know what, maybe we can scale that back a little bit. Nope. And they put it in the report. It is absolutely mind-bogglingly dumb. But that just shows you how far gone these cultists are.
Yeah, there's a comment over here by Doug Troyer saying, "Who really thinks that this is serious?" And I'm curious of what his mindset is. I'm not too familiar with this commenter here, but because I when I first saw this, I kind of thought it was satire. Like there's no way that this is true, because the first thing I saw was a snapshot of the idea that like you could only purchase 3 items of clothing a year. And I thought it was a joke, but then like I've read enough. Well, I mean, I read this report too, but I've read enough of the World Economic Forum. I've been on their website. I've seen that they have whole sections of their website dedicated to the unsustainability of the textile manufacturing and all of that. I've seen all of their articles talking about how, we have to allow crickets and insects to be part of the protein when it comes to protein consumption worldwide. So this is not out of step with the stuff that we've already talked about numerous times on this podcast. They're just being upfront about it. So Justin, I'm curious for your initial takes on what we're going through here.
Yeah, I actually don't have a problem with this report at all. I really like this report.
Justin only buys 2 things of clothing.
Yeah, I mean, I basically work from home. I don't go anywhere. This gets me out of a lot of traveling to see people I don't really want to see. Yeah. I don't have to go to the office ever again. So, I mean, this is all pretty good. But the reason I say that is because I'm a big believer in, when it comes to the climate change stuff, the really radical climate change stuff, we should be talking about this. We should be taking the arguments that the far left are making, and we should apply them logically to policy. Okay. And that's exactly what these people are doing.
Right.
What they're saying is, if we're all going to die, if we take that as the foundational starting point, we're all going to die from climate change. What do we need to do in order to immediately stop that from happening? And the so-called solutions that they suggest in this are probably right, in the sense that if we really are going to die and we really are going to try to stop it using the supposed methods that will stop it from the left, then we would have to do all of these crazy things by 2030.
Right.
And I look at that and say, great. If that's the position that you're running with, good luck. Because no one is actually going to do those things yet. That is what it takes. So when Joe Biden, the thing that bothers me is when Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, they get up on TV and they say it's an existential threat. It's a crisis to humankind. And if we don't, change things now, then, and they talk in all these generalities, they talk about it as an existential threat, but then they don't actually propose only buying 3 things of clothes in a year, or not traveling more than 900 miles or whatever. Like they don't propose those things. Why? Because they know that if they did, they would be totally rejected out of hand. So these people are actually saying, well, if we are really going to do this, then this is what it looks like. And you know what it looks like? Awful, really bad. Nobody wants the world that the University of Leeds in this report is building. And so that's what I want. I am not tired or frustrated of these kinds of things. I love these reports. The things that bother me are the things that you hear from Joe Biden, where he calls it an existential crisis, but then doesn't treat it like an existential crisis.
Right.
If you really believe it, then you got to be out there. Why isn't Joe Biden every single day out there saying the things that are in this report? Why? If he really believes we're all going to die, which is what he says, why isn't he advocating for these same things? That's the stuff that really bothers me. So I love this. This is great. Yeah. Now I'm as likely to use this. I'm more likely to use this than people who are on the left, because I can say, look, this is what their world looks like. Does it sound good to you? And who's going to sign up for that?
Yeah, far too many people think that combating climate change just means switching from those dirty, polluting, outdated fossil fuels to new, shiny, high-tech solar and wind and all of that. And then once we do that, then we could just keep living the life as we want.
Yes.
And it's like, no, this is the world that is consistent with that worldview.
Yes.
Not that one.
That's such an important point. The underlying argument that is, or the underlying assumption that's made by everybody in the debate is we're deciding between everything stays the same either way. It's just, where do we get our energy from? And do we have to pay a little bit more to save the world? And that's it. That's the choice. When in reality, that's not the choice. In reality, the choice is we blow up everything and society as we know it crumbles to the ground, or we keep living the way we've been living, where everybody's living longer, having better lives, quality of life is improving, poverty is being reduced. Those are the choices. And
Right.
that's never how the debate is framed, even though that's the logical if you take the underlying assumption and you apply it logically to policy, this is where you end up, where the University of Leeds is going.
There's a comment. I think that's very important. There's a comment that says from Engineer Guy SE. Will cats and dogs have to go vegan? And that's a good question. And
Yes.
is your allotted meat that you're allowed during the progressive metric there? Do your cats eat into yours, or do they have their own metric? We need a new report on that.
Yeah.
Chris.
Also, are we even allowed to have them? Would I think be a good question, because they're just unnecessary more mouth breathers, as Jim would say. They're just more mouth breathers out there.
Right. Chris, jump in. I'm sure
just
you're biting at it. Yeah.
Couple quick comments. I think, Jim and Justin, really analyzed this, pretty much in full. But the first thought that came to my mind when I saw this and started reading about it is this sounds like they want to have the pandemic lockdowns now just for forever. So I think that this,
thought.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think that they are predicating this off of the lockdowns where you couldn't really travel in a car because there was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to buy stuff from. So you didn't buy anything, blah, blah, blah. The other thing that I think that this represents to me is part of the Great Reset agenda. So this is right up your and Justin's alley. The part of the Great Reset agenda in my mind is that they want to push the masses into these cities because they can control people when they live in cities.
Sure.
They cannot control people when they live out in the rural areas because they can't control where they, go in their cars and this kind of stuff. So I think that this is part of the bifurcated society that they want to implement, where those people who live in the cities and who obey them and who follow their orders, yeah, you can function in society. You can have access to, a bank. You can have access to a job, blah, blah, blah. But if you're one of those people that dares defy these, these orders that they are trying to enforce, well, good luck trying to survive in the outskirts of the cities. I think that that's what this is really about. I think that that's a big part of this.
And let me be clear, there's nothing in this report that suggests that any of this stuff would be mandated by force of government or anything like that. So I don't want to put any extra juice in this that's not specifically stated in there. But we do know, just from being aware of all the stuff that goes on in the world, that when it comes to government, usually it starts off with voluntary actions. Then it moves to encouraging you to take the right steps. Then it moves to incentivizing you to comply. And then punishments for non-compliance, and then it's straight up force. So that's the flow chart of things when it comes to governments intervening in something.
But that's how things
just
work.
That first step.
But that's how things work in ordinary times. But as we've seen in the past couple of years, when they declare a crisis, that means that you can, dismiss and ignore the Constitution and, ordinary governmental procedures and just say it's an emergency. We have to do these things to prevent the emergency, whether it's a pandemic or climate change. And as we saw during the pandemic, a lot of people at the World Economic Forum and, these elitist institutions said, this is the blueprint. We have to do this after the pandemic's over, but applied to climate change. So that's why I think this is part of a much grander strategy at play here.
Yeah, no doubt. And then you brought up, Chris, the idea that this is kind of reminding you of the COVID lockdowns and all of that. So I want to bring up this other article. This is from Fox Business. And this, you would think that, for all of those that comply with these things, like that there is going to be some portion of people that go ahead with all of this and they'll do these things even if they hate it, and then they'll complain about the people that don't fall in line. And we know there's plenty of these people. We saw them every day during the COVID pandemic. Well, they're not safe either. So here's a story from Fox Business explaining how people in Switzerland could be banned from using their electric cars when the country is facing an energy crunch. So the article starts off saying Switzerland could ban electric vehicles from being used non-essentially this winter as government officials begin to brace for an energy crisis during the winter months, according to reports. The Telegraph reported on Saturday that Swiss officials have drafted emergency proposals that restrict power usage if things get bad this winter. For example, shops may need to reduce their hours, streaming services may need to be limited, and buildings may only be heated to 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Other bans, according to the Telegraph, may include concerts, theater performances, and sporting events to all be canceled to prevent a blackout. So Switzerland relies on a lot of hydropower during the summer months, and they rely on a lot of energy imports during the winter months. So obviously we know what's going on worldwide that's causing this crunch. But as Chris kind of teased, these climate restrictions are really starting to look and sound familiar, aren't they? I mean, when was the last time that you heard something deemed non-essential? When was the last time we had public events being shut down, for the greater good and all of that? It's almost as if COVID provided a roadmap for how these people should, treat civilization, when climate change rears its ugly head. Jim, you've been nice and silent for a while. You want to chime in on this story?
Well, I'm struck by a comment by one of our viewers, Reese Reed, who says that's why they want us in electric cars so they can cut off our travel. I was on a podcast actually yesterday. It's going to air on Monday. It's called America Out Loud, to Heartland affiliated people, Jay Lair and Tom Harris, and we talked about energy policy and fossil fuels and things like electric cars and that sort of thing. And one of the points that we were, one of the points about this that we were talking about is that green energy cannot actually power our modern world at all. There's no chance for it. And that's the point. The point is that we have too much prosperity, at least people in the West, at least ordinary people in the West. You have to keep making the caveat that the elites will always have what they want and will have no reduction in their own lifestyles. It happens every time, from the Soviet Union, where the elites had all the luxuries that they wanted and the regular people suffered. This is the same kind of, frankly, global regime that is being created via doing something about the climate crisis. And so the point is that we won't have enough energy to go where we want. The point is that if we're forced into electric cars, the vast majority of us will not be able to afford them. And that's where your coercion comes in. When you're the state of California and you pass a law banning the sale of an internal combustion engine vehicle starting in 35, that is coercion. That is to make it so that you cannot afford your own personal transportation. The problem in the eyes of these climate cultists and power-grabbing global elites is that you have too much freedom. And if you have a boundless energy that is affordable, that allows you to do whatever you want, go where you want, heat your home to the level that you want it heated, stream as much as you feel like, plugging in all of your electronic devices. If you have the freedom to do these things, you can't be controlled. All of this is to condition us, one, to get used to having a crappier standard of living, and to make us all miserable so that we're a lot easier to control. That's what all of this is about. So the energy shortages you are seeing in Europe are the goal. It's a feature of these policies. It's not a bug.
Yeah, I see a comment from Pitbull Mama that's talking about smart cities, ... horrifying. And, we didn't even really get into the concept of smart cities. Smart cities is a thing that's also being pushed by, people in the World Economic Forum. Again, on their website, they have whole sections of their website dedicated to this concept of smart cities. And we probably don't even have enough time to get into that in depth today, but we should, because me and Justin personally have done a lot of research into smart cities, and we could do a whole hour talking about that. And you're right, horrifying. Justin, you want to chime in on this story, this Switzerland story, or just kind of all of this in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what people have to keep in mind when they are seeing these kinds of stories is that these problems, whatever problems you're seeing with Russia and energy shortages related to the war with Russia and Ukraine and global, all sorts of global energy problems, is nothing compared to the deliberate transformation that people on the left claim they want to make when it comes to our energy systems all over the world. Whatever problems you're seeing right now are a tiny fraction of the kinds of problems and shortages and concerns that are going to exist, and potentials for blackouts and everything else that's going to exist if we really were to run mostly on solar panels when the sun doesn't always shine, wind farms when the wind isn't always blowing, batteries, which are not always reliable as they say, and you need to have millions and millions of them to run the entire country on energy that's going to be stored in it.
Oh, they admit that the battery storage is not up to snuff at all. Like they
Right.
admit that.
Right. And so, and that's, and the transmission lines that you need to build through thousands of neighborhoods that don't want them, and all the issues, right? Whatever these are, this is a tiny little fraction. So when people look at it and say, well, so, you know, the war in Ukraine, like that's the reason why we have all these crazy things. It's like, yeah, that's partially true. A lot of these problems could have been avoided had Europe just had common sense energy policies leading up to this. But even if we exclude that from the equation, just keep in mind the stuff that they're calling for by design, the Democratic Party and others in Europe, is way bigger than what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. Way bigger. I know that's hard for people to understand that, but it's true, because the amount of energy provided by Russia is pales in comparison to the kinds of transformations that they're actively advocating for. So these problems are going to get worse if we continue to move in the direction of more unreliable energy sources. There is a reason. I know this is really hard for people who are on the left to believe, but there is a reason why the energy system has been built the way it has. Sure. There's a reason why. And it's not based entirely on corruption and crony capitalism and all this other stuff. It's largely because these are the most reliable forms of energy. It's easy to ramp them up and ramp them down. You can build them anywhere. You can build a natural gas plant basically anywhere, right? Nuclear, you can build just about anywhere. There's a reason why these things exist. And the left wants to destroy it and replace it with an unreliable system. And this is the world this is a little, I think it's a warning shot. If we keep going in the direction of unreliable energy, look at what's happening to Europe right now, multiply that by 10. That's what the entire Western world is facing, and it would be catastrophic.
Chris, I got another big facet of this conversation that I want to bring up, but I'll give you the option. You could either have a first swing on the next thing or last words on this particular story.
I'll just tie this one up. I think that what they've done is that they've created a crisis on purpose, because by creating the crisis, they can then implement their, crazy pseudo solutions. So we actually don't have an energy crisis. We've got more than enough natural gas. We've got more than enough oil. We've got nuclear power. We've got tons and tons and tons of available.
We have a man-made energy crisis.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. When Joe Biden came in office, what did he do on day one? He said no Keystone XL pipeline. What has he done in the past, year and a half? He has, drastically reduced the amount of drilling on federal lands. We could go on and on and on. Taxes and regulations. So they are purposefully stifling the production of cheap and affordable and accessible energy, so that they can then say, well, we have to do this, this Green New Deal type stuff. And it just so happens that they are the ones who are going to benefit from this, because their donors are the ones who are, in these industries. And guess what? Joe Biden and the, people like him will never abide by the rules that they're trying to implement upon us.
Yeah, there's another article that I'm just going to very quickly breeze over. If you want to check it out, everything we talk about is linked in the show notes. But there's an article here on the Blaze talking about how Gavin Newsom in California is proposing a civil penalty on oil companies. Quote, either big oil reins in their profits or prices, or they'll pay a penalty. So this just kind of goes to show that once a scapegoat is identified, nothing is off limits from these wannabe totalitarians. So it's an interesting story, but I want to get to this other one in the remaining.
May I make one very quick comment on this?
Okay.
If Gavin Newsom, the would-be king of California, is so concerned about companies making massive profits, well, he should really be pissed at companies like Google and Apple, because their profit margins are gigantic. They dwarf almost any other industry. So why is he not coming down on the tech billionaires and their outrageous profits.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating because it's just so it's pure lies, pure
Sure.
lies and propaganda.
Yeah. So the thing that I want to spend a little bit more time on is this article from the Washington Post. And if you have watched this show long enough, you'll know that I hold population control as one of the all-time despicable concepts out there. The choice to have a child is one of the most like sacred decisions a woman could make that truly goes to like the depths of the soul of a potential mother. And to potentially rip that choice away from somebody, I can't even put into words how horrid of a concept that is. So forgive me if I'm sensitive when I see articles published by one of the largest newspapers out there, the Washington Post, with titles reading, "Should you not have kids because of climate change? It's complicated." So to the author's credit, she does try to take a nuanced and mostly agnostic approach to the topic, but the article is just filled with a bunch of anti-human rhetoric. So they talk about an Oregon State University paper that estimates how each child born will add thousands of tons of carbon dioxide to their parents' lifetime carbon legacy. This idea of considering the lifetime consumption of each new child. Having one fewer child is an emission reduction decision that dwarfs any other lifestyle choice that you can make, whether that's choosing to own a car or using green energy or not flying or recycling religiously. All of those dwarfed by the idea of not having a kid. So now, again, the author does bring balance and nuance to some of these things, but this topic just makes me think of a couple kind of big things. The first one is that I feel like when you talk about this topic this way, it brings this decision into the realm of politics and policy, and suddenly it feels like Al Gore is going to be able to come in and weigh in on whether or not on your decision of whether or not to have a kid. And like that alone like grosses me out, that you'll have Bernie Sanders on that 7-hour long town hall on CNN talking about the importance of bringing these choices to the forefront of mothers that are choosing to have kids or whatever. The second thing, and this might be even worse, and it just shows how like the terrible propaganda is causing women in this country and throughout the world to make decisions that they might not otherwise make, and potentially miss out on a lifetime of potential happiness and fulfillment because of a bunch of alarmists scared you enough to not make that decision. And then the last thing that I feel like this conversation brings up is that it starts to really tilt the scales of looking at people by definition as a drain on society, a liability for society, some type of burden that you're bringing onto society just by being born. And that's opposed to the lifespan of humanity, where a new person was always looked at as an asset to the culture and to the society and all of that. So this kind of conversation flips that on its head, and all of those points that I make just like sicken me to my core. I was writing my notes for this. I was like 10 minutes into writing my notes for this specific segment, and Justin calls me, and I had to center myself because I was so heated about all the stuff that I was reading about here. And again, it just absolutely grosses me out. Jim, I'll let you take first swing on this.
The title of this podcast is, you asked me for title ideas, and this is the one I came up with, one of several, and you picked it, Our Dystopian Green Future. This is our dystopian green present, actually, is what we're experiencing right now. I mean, this is laying the groundwork, as you said, in the Washington Post, of all, one of the most prestigious newspapers in the world, suggesting, just a little soft suggestion that, you probably shouldn't have a family. And they really do think of human beings as a disease, like Agent Smith in The Matrix. We are a virus upon the earth. And right. There needs to be a lot fewer of us. They believe this. And the scary part is that these radical leftists are in control of the most powerful institutions on this planet, from the World Economic Forum to the heads of governments in almost every country in Europe, to our elites here in the United States, in Congress and elsewhere, to academia, to media. They believe this stuff, and they believe that humans are a plague on the earth. The chart that Andy had up on the screen showed that by far, by orders of magnitude, the best thing you can do for the planet is to not have a child. And in fact, they even said the stuff that we talked about earlier in this podcast, like getting rid of your car. There it is. Live car free is you reduce your metric tonnage of CO2 in the atmosphere by 2.4. Whereas having one fewer child, you get a 58.6 score. All of this ties into, again, ESG and the idea of social credit scores. Do you think in the future, if social credit scores are a real thing, that you will have that it will harm or help your social credit score if you have a second child or a third child? Of course, it's going to hurt your social credit score. This is dystopian. This is horrifying, and this is being mainstreamed in thought among our elites. And now it's filtering down into the media people consume, where people will start to think to themselves, yeah, I probably shouldn't have another kid, or they'll look askance at their sister or their cousin or their neighbor who now has their fifth or fourth kid. And they will socially ostracize these people. This is evil stuff, man. That is evil to perpetuate this kind of thing. And actually, good on Elon Musk. He says that what we have, the biggest problem to humanity is that we're not making enough kids. That he says is the biggest problem right now. And so that's what makes me think he's one of the clearest thinkers out there among the global elite.
Yeah, I mean, Justin knows my interest in this population control thing. Justin, do you remember a couple of things that I routinely bring up? One of them was a letter signed by like 11,000 scientists. This is from about 3 years ago. Grabbed a whole lot of attention because it was 11,000 scientists signed onto this letter talking about how climate change is going to be terrible and how we have to act now. And what most of the stories left out was a couple of paragraphs talking about populations. And at one point, they talked about how global population, quote, must be stabilized and ideally gradually reduced within a framework that ensures social integrity. And they also refer to human population growth as a, quote, profoundly troubling sign. And then there was also another part of the same letter that labels economic and population growth as, quote, an important drivers of increases in CO2 emissions. So again, this letter being heralded all across these news sites talking about all these scientists getting together. There's population control language in it. There's anti-human rhetoric in that letter. And then the other one that I always like to bring up is that one study or analysis that was authored by what was it? It was like Georgetown or something. A bunch of like 3 different academics from a couple of like more prestigious universities, and they talked about like what we could do to limit population control across a spectrum of coercion. And on the most non-coercive side was choice enhancement. And I think we all know what choice enhancement was. And then the next level was basically propaganda. Like, we just need this message of you're going to be happier with less kids put out in TV and movies and billboards and school plays and stuff. I'm not even exaggerating. And then the third level was incentivization. And maybe we can tweak the tax code to make it more beneficial to not have kids. And then the fourth section, on the furthest on the end of this spectrum of coercion, was like China's one-child policy type things, which they made very clear that they were not advocating for. But when they made it very clear that they weren't advocating for that, they kind of, you can insinuate that they were advocating for the other 3, or at least thought that those were morally fine. So Justin, I could talk all day about this stuff, but what do you have to say when you see an article like this in the Washington Post?
At its foundation, this idea is, I think, if you trace it back to sort of the genesis of where this sort of mindset comes from, I think it really does come from a collectivist first mindset. It really does stem from sort of Marxism and socialism and that whole school of thought. And as that's become increasingly more popular and become increasingly less tied to religion, because there was a period of time in the progressive era where sort of progressivist ideas and socialist ideas were being merged with Christian ideas, at least in America. And that put some guardrails on how far collectivism can go, right? You want collectivism, but collectivism has to at least be to some extent to help people. That's the focus of this, individual people. And people are not bad, and more people could be a good thing. But as the progressive movement and as the socialist movement in the West became less tied to religion and more focused on just sort of a secular view of that, the natural outflow of that is, well, if our focus is how do we make life better for the collective, then you can see how adding more people to the collective makes the problem bigger, right? So if you already have a problem with poverty and you've got more people in poverty having kids, that's a bigger problem. If you already need to feed people and you've got more mouths to feed, that's a problem. If you need to pay for healthcare for everybody and now more people need healthcare, that's a problem. Whereas on the opposite side, when you have a free market and you have a focus on individual rights, these are not problems. These are good. These are actually good things because these are more people with more ideas, more innovation, more entrepreneurship, more decentralization of thought and experimentation and all of these other things. And so for me, foundationally, even though nobody is consciously, very few people are consciously thinking about these things in this way, I really do think that the foundation of all of this is the idea of, do we put the emphasis on collective first, or do we put the emphasis on every individual life matters first? Those are the two competing ideologies, really. And that's where all of this goes off the rails. The moment you say, well, I put the collective first, follow that logically. We don't want the collective bigger then until we solve all the problems. If we solve all the problems, then maybe the collective can get bigger then, but only in a way that, but that's, and this is exactly why China has had historically a one-child policy, a two-child policy. You know, this is why they do these kinds of, why? Because their problems were getting bigger. We need to get the problems smaller. And so I really think that it's a missed opportunity to talk about these things and not emphasize that, you know, again, logically, we talked about climate change and the logical outflow of having a sort of catastrophic view of climate change. The logical outflow of putting the collective above everything else is you end up with this. And I think that's a really important thing people got to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely wild. Chris, population control. What do you think when you see so
pro or con, Chris?
Well, let me think about that for a minute.
You know.
Well, Donnie, I mean, AOC said that the world's going to end in 12 years anyway. So why are we even debating any of this stuff? I mean, aren't we like 8 years away from like the end of the world? Like, why do we even care? But on a serious note, I think Justin really nailed this one. I think that this is the classic air of Marxism, socialism, collectivism in general. They think that everything's a zero-sum game, and they think that the economy is a pie that is not able to grow. That it's it's the same, and it has to be distributed. And if it's distributed amongst more people, then everyone's going to smaller slice of the pie. As Justin said, in America and in the West, and what we've learned is, actually, if you have a free market economy and you let people just, do their thing and you let them innovate and start a business, you've got people like Henry Ford who do things and all have cars, or, you've got people who, Alexander Graham Bell, and we can all communicate together. So the more people you have, the more opportunities you have for innovation, entrepreneurship, and groundbreaking technologies. So I really don't understand why they are hell-bent on, on their degrowth, depopulation movement, but it makes sense if you understand their point of view, which is everything's finite. And I don't view everything as finite. I view everything as, well, human innovation can overcome, if we're going to run out of oil in, 200 years, because we can come up with cold fusion or whatever. So I just think it's a fundamental difference in the understanding of like what humans are capable of. And they want to implement their framework upon the rest of us, instead of just saying, hey, you know what, go and be prosperous and wealth will be created. And the more people there are and the more ideas that are in churning in the economy, the more opportunities for economic innovation and prosperity.
Just one quick thing on that. The proof of this theory being true is the entire history of human civilization. When you had very few people in the beginning and things were really bad, and then over time we have more people and things get progressively better. And the more people we've had, the better things have gotten overall. and see things keep getting better, even though we keep having more people. That is proof of it.
So
I think that the other side should have to disprove thousands and thousands of years of empirical evidence if we're going to adopt that approach, and they can't possibly do it.
yeah, I brought up the World Economic Forum a handful of times already, and I'm going to bring it up one more time because this is kind of the underlying principle of a lot of their ideas, is this kind of this reversal of how you consider humans a liability or an asset. So we have a video here. This seems to be a little bit of an older clip, but it still represents the views of this gentleman. This is Yuval Harari, which is considered one of the kind of right-hand mans of Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum. And in this clip, he is talking about what the future of humanity looks like for an individual. So let's go ahead and play this clip.
What we're talking about now is like a second industrial revolution, but the product this time will not be textiles or machines or vehicles or even weapons. The product this time will be humans themselves. We are basically learning to produce bodies and minds. This time, if you're not part of the revolution fast enough, then you probably become extinct. Once you know how to produce bodies and brains and minds, so cheap labor in Africa or South Asia or wherever, it simply counts for nothing. And again, I think that the biggest question maybe in economics and politics of the coming decades will be what to do with all these useless people. I don't think we have an economic model for that. The problem is more boredom and what to do with them and how will they find some sense of meaning in life when they are basically meaningless, worthless. My best guess at present is a combination of drugs and computer games.
So that's right. Vast majority of people, meaningless, useless to the society. How are they gonna avert their own boredom? Well, we'll just drug them up and let them play video games. This is the mindset of this global elitist type that are at the forefront of this great reset, that are at the forefront of all this climate alarmism. When you take away all of the marketing schemes that they try to sell this to the general public, if you strip away all of the frills and good sounding sound bites, that's the message right there. It's the idea that you are a liability on society and that you need to limit your car travel. You need to limit your carbon footprint. You need to only buy 3 items of clothing a year, and you better be happy about it. Jim, I'll give you last words, and then we're going to wrap up the episode.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things he said there is he was just confounded. How could somebody find meaning in life? These useless people, if we have everything automated and we're building brains, or, I'm sure he means artificial intelligence, that because these people are so collectivist, as Justin was talking about, they're so collectivist in their thinking. It doesn't occur to them that an individual who is alive with a soul, can find his own purpose in life and has a right to live it as he sees fit. It doesn't even cross his mind that is a possibility in the future, because we have a collectivist future in his mind. And if you're not part of the second industrial revolution, in which you are advancing the goals of the collective, if you are an individualist, you are worthless. You're a useless eater. And how could you possibly find any purpose in life? And so we'll just have to either drug you up so that you don't bother us and give you video games, or maybe worse.
Well, Donnie, you know that I just read Homo Deus, which is Yuval Harari's book. And Jim, actually, throughout the book, and this is a major point that he makes, humans don't have souls. We're just algorithms. And no kidding. So he would reject the entire premise that humans have souls, because according to him, we're just neurons firing in it, and if we can have a non-conscious if we can have a non-conscious algorithm that can better organize society or make decisions better for us, then he is all for it. So well, this is the tip of the iceberg for this guy.
We're gonna have to do a World Economic Forum dedicated episode talking all about Yuval Harari. I also read that book too, and the smart cities. We'll get into all of it, but we're gonna have to save that for a future episode because we are out of time. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. If you are hearing this on a Friday or later, you could always join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we're streaming on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and Twitter. You can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the stream there. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Also, like I mentioned, we are shifting this show over to Stopping Socialism TV on YouTube. So if you are listening to the audio only, nothing's going to change. You're going to be able to find the podcast in the same spot that you always have. But if you're watching that video version on YouTube, join us on Stopping Socialism TV. That's where it's going to be housed permanently after the first of the new year. And also, if you want to help our show grow, you could always hit that subscribe button, leave a review for the podcast if you're listening to the audio only. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that share button, hit that subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment underneath the video, all things that help break through that big tech algorithm that prevents content like this from being shown to more people. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod. And if you have any comments or questions for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Justin Haskins, same question.
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook, Twitter, Parler, and everything else.
Fantastic. And Chris, what do you have to pitch today?
StoppingSocialism.com. Got some great new articles up there. And for anyone who hasn't checked it out, please look at our 2022 socialist watch list and look at how the socialists performed in the midterms elections.
Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff. All right, thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.